Thanks for listening to this episode of History's Greatest Battles. If you enjoy this episode or any others, please both subscribe and share this podcast with a friend. How do you command an army that operates on foreign soil for 17 years straight without mass quantities of desertions or any reported mutiny at all? Especially when that army is all but cut off from their homeland, both geographically and in terms of supplies and fresh recruits. Leadership. From what we know, Hannibal slept on his military cloak. He ate the rations of the common soldier and shared every hardship he asked of his men. His father, Hamilcar Barca, said of him, quote, "My son Hannibal will be a great general. Because of all my soldiers, he knows best how to obey," end quote. Is there something lost in translation here? Could obey mean more than simply obedience to the higher-ups? Could it mean conforming to the life of a soldier instead of demanding the special treatment allotted to high command? What we see in, say, the British Navy during the Napoleonic eras, those men led as well. But I question whether they could have commanded for nearly 2 decades behind enemy lines. Hannibal was one of the greatest generals of his time, and he very well could be on a top 10 list. For better or worse, though, the battle we'll experience today stoked the flames of fortune for his enemy, Rome, and snuffed even further the fire that drove the Carthaginians. Let's now experience the Battle of the Metaurus River.
Welcome to History's Greatest Battles, Season 1, Episode 41, the Battle of the Metaurus River, 207 BC. Roman forces, 50,000 soldiers. Carthaginian forces, 50,000 soldiers. The crushing defeat of Hasdrubal's forces shattered any hope of reinforcing Hannibal, sealing his fate in Italy and leaving him isolated. With Carthage's ambitions in ruin, Rome swiftly solidified its dominance over Spain, ensuring its grip on the western Mediterranean.
Carthage, rising from the soil near what is now Tunis, began as a vanguard of Phoenicia's maritime empire, a city destined to carve its name into history. When the proud cities of Tyre and Sidon crumbled beneath the waves of invaders, their richest citizens fled across the sea to Carthage, bringing their gold and ambition to this new frontier. In short time, Carthage seized dominance over northern Africa, its merchants commanding the vast arteries of Mediterranean trade, while its granaries swelled with the harvests of fertile lands under their iron grip. The merchant princes of Carthage, fattened on wealth and power, unleashed legions of hardened mercenaries from Spain, men who fought not for love of country, but for the glint of silver and the thrill of battle. These mercenary armies crushed the defiant tribes of the region, breaking their will and ensuring Carthage's absolute control over trade routes and commerce, enforcing dominance with blood and with steel. The rising economic might of Carthage collided with the Greek colony of Massilia, sparking brutal raids on the city's ships and the city's port. Yet Massilia's alliance with Rome ignited a far greater conflict, one destined to reshape the fate of the world. For decades, Rome and Carthage had managed an uneasy balance, each respecting the other's sphere of power, their treaties a fragile shield against the inevitable clash that they both knew loomed. By 265 BC, Rome's legions stood victorious, having ground the entirety of Italy beneath their sandals, their banners flying over conquered lands from the Alps to the southern shores. As Rome's ambitions stretched northward into Gaul and toward the territory surrounding Massilia, Carthage's aggressive moves set the Senate on edge, knowing full well that conflict with the African power was now a question of when, not if. Yet it was not the skirmishes near Massilia that lit the fire of war between Rome and Carthage. That honor belonged to Sicily, the jewel in the Mediterranean, whose blood-soaked soil would become the battleground for dominance. A band of ruthless Italian mercenaries, the Mamertines, proudly naming themselves the Sons of Mars, stormed across Sicily, seizing towns and throwing the island into chaos. Besieged by King Hiero of Syracuse, these warriors called for aid from both Rome and Carthage, each empire smelling opportunity beneath the guise of assistance, both eager to dominate the island for themselves. Carthage moved swiftly, sending forces to rescue the Mamertines, but Rome, ever cautious of Carthaginian power so close to its doorstep, allied itself with Hiero, ready to confront their rival head-on. And so began the First Punic War, a clash that stretched from 264 to 241 BC, grinding both mighty empires to the point of exhaustion, as neither would relent nor surrender the prize of Sicily. As the war dragged on, Rome, never one to leave its fate to fortune, constructed its first battle fleet, an audacious move for a land-based power, but one that would soon make the seas tremble with Roman oars. Neither Carthage nor Rome could decisively claim victory over the other, but it was Rome's naval triumph at the Iagotis Islands in 241 that tipped the scales, allowing them to force Carthage to its knees in peace negotiations. Carthage, humiliated, abandoned all claims to Sicily, ceding the island to Roman control save for the strategic outpost of Syracuse, which remained under local rule for now. To salt the wound further, Carthage was burdened with crushing reparations, a financial chain around its neck that would weigh heavily in the years to come. The peace between Rome and Carthage was a tense, fragile thing, the air thick with distrust for the next 2 decades, each side sharpening its blades in preparation for the next inevitable clash. In 238 BC, Rome snatched Sardinia from Carthage's grasp after the mercenaries there rebelled, adding another strategic jewel to Rome's growing empire. Between 225 and 222 BC, Rome found itself fighting on multiple fronts, driving back fierce Gaulish invaders, and then marching eastward to crush Illyria on the Adriatic coast, firmly stamping its authority on the region by 219. But in that same year, the storm clouds of war with Carthage once more gathered on the horizon, thick and ominous, heralding the bloodshed to come. The treaty that had momentarily stilled the conflict had split Spain into spheres of influence, with Rome controlling the lands above the Ebro River and Carthage maintaining a tenuous grip on the territories below. The spark of war ignited in the town of Saguntum, far south of the Ebro, a Carthaginian sphere but one ruled by leaders who were loyal to Rome, a situation that could not stand in Hannibal's eyes. When Hannibal, Carthage's unrelenting warlord, laid siege to Saguntum, its desperate elders turned to Rome, pleading for the might of the Republic to save them. Scholars have debated whether Hannibal intended this siege to provoke war, but war is precisely what he unleashed, whether by design or by fate. In 219 BC, Hannibal, defiant, refused to retreat from Saguntum, and in response, Rome declared war, setting the stage for the Second Punic War and the battles that would thunder across the continent. After 8 brutal months, Hannibal took Saguntum by force, and with that victory under his belt, began crafting his audacious plan to invade Italy itself, aiming straight at the heart of Roman power. In the spring of 218, Hannibal embarked on one of the most daring military campaigns in history, leading 90,000 warriors across the Pyrenees, through the wilds of southern Gaul, and then scaling the treacherous, snow-choked Alps to descend into northern Italy by October. By the time he reached the plains of Italy, his once mighty host had dwindled to only 20,000 infantry, 6,000 cavalry, and a handful of his war elephants, survivors of the grueling march through the Alp mountain range. Hannibal's invasion struck Rome like a thunderbolt. The Senate, caught off guard, scrambled to redirect their forces. Their response, hasty and uncoordinated, was nothing short of disastrous. For 17 relentless years, Hannibal roamed the Italian peninsula like a predator, crushing every Roman army that dared to face him, his genius on the battlefield unmatched. Yet the toll of endless campaigns forced Hannibal to scrape together soldiers from the local populations, men whose loyalty was questionable and whose skill in battle was often lacking. As the war dragged on, Hannibal, in need of fresh troops to maintain his stranglehold on Italy, summoned his brother Hasdrubal to march to his side. While Hannibal's forces ravaged Italy, though never quite managing to breach the walls of Rome itself, the Senate struck back by dispatching legions to Spain, aiming to sever Hannibal's lifeline to Carthage and cut off his flow of men and supplies. Rome now held sway over the sea, yet Carthage remained resourceful, slipping soldiers and supplies across the Strait of Gibraltar through Spain, keeping Hannibal's campaign alive. Roman fortunes in Spain fluctuated, but their hope began to rise with the arrival of Publius Cornelius Scipio, a general whose brilliance would soon rival even that of Hannibal's. The commanders before him had lost ground north of the Ebro, but Scipio, relentless in his pursuit of victory, reclaimed those lands and pressed south, preparing for a decisive clash with Hasdrubal's forces. After a fierce but indecisive battle near Cordova in 108 BC, Hasdrubal understood the weight of his brother's call. If he marched into Italy, Spain would be left to the mercy of Scipio. Yet his brother's fate could not be ignored. Hasdrubal led his army into the southern reaches of Gaul, where he wintered, gathering fresh recruits for the arduous campaign that lay ahead. In the spring of 207, Hasdrubal, like his brother before him, dared to cross the Alps, leading 50,000 men, half of them fierce Gauls, into Italy. Hasdrubal's forces besieged Placentia, but he soon abandoned the siege, turning his army south toward Fanum Fortuna on the Adriatic, seeking a more decisive confrontation. It was at Fanum Fortuna that Hasdrubal's forces met the legions of M. Livius Salinitor, the Roman general standing firm to block his path. Hannibal, aware his brother marched to join him, yet blind to the details of his progress, waited in winter quarters in the south of Italy, patience mixed with growing unease. Upon hearing of the siege at Placentia, Hannibal began his slow march north, confident that such a siege could last long enough for him to time his arrival with precision. Hannibal set up camp at Canusium, modern-day Canossa, his soldiers resting as he waited for word from Hasdrubal, uncertain of the fate that approached from the north. Every step of Hannibal's march was mirrored by Roman legions under Caius Claudius Nero, who positioned himself like a blade between the two Carthaginian armies, ever watchful. Fortune smiled on Nero, for his troops captured two of Hasdrubal's couriers, uncovering the plan to unite with Hannibal in Umbria, information that would soon turn the tide of war. Nero, taking a calculated gamble that no other couriers had escaped, left a small force to keep an eye on Hannibal, and led 6,000 of his finest infantry and 1,000 cavalry north, determined to join Livius and strike at Hasdrubal. Nero sent messages ahead, ordering farmers along his path to prepare provisions for his men. Marching swiftly, he reached Fanum Fortuna in just 7 days, slipping into Livius's camp under the cover of night. Nero, knowing the element of surprise was his greatest weapon, urged Livius and his officers to engage Hasdrubal at once. Yet Hasdrubal, sharp as ever, had already sensed Nero's presence and refused to commit to battle. Under the cloak of night, Hasdrubal began a retreat along the Via Flaminia, but fate struck a cruel blow as his guides deserted him, leaving him delayed and vulnerable to Roman pursuit. Nero wasted no time. He hunted Hasdrubal with relentless speed, catching up to his forces near the Metaurus River, at a site likely near the modern ravine of San Angelo, where the Carthaginian general's fate would be sealed. Hasdrubal, knowing time was short, hastily arranged his army into 3 divisions, the Gauls on his left, shielded by a ravine. Ligurian warriors held the center, supported by the looming presence of war elephants. And to the right, under Hasdrubal's direct command, stood his hardened Spanish soldiers. The Roman legions mirrored this formation, with Nero himself taking command on the right, facing the Gauls across the ravine. In the center stood the praetor Porcius, while the consul Livius led the Roman left flank, prepared to test Hasdrubal's strength. Both armies stood with gaps between their formations, each segment fighting its own battle, separated by terrain and tactics, awaiting the moment when the lines would clash. The Spaniards struck first, charging forward with a savage energy, while the Ligurians, whom Livy described as, quote, a hardy race of warriors, end quote, from northern Italy, pressed towards Porcius, eager to test the Roman mettle. Nero found himself cut off from the Gauls by the deep ravine, unable to engage them directly, yet he knew that this separation was both a hindrance and a potential advantage. Realizing the Gauls were just as trapped as he was, Nero made a bold decision. he left a small force to keep them at bay and then led his main contingent southward, moving swiftly behind the battle before wheeling his troops to strike the Spaniards from behind, a maneuver designed to break their spirits. Despite Hasdrubal's inspired command, his soldiers couldn't withstand the ferocity of Nero's flank attack. The weight of the Roman pincer crushed their resolve, and the Carthaginian lines began to shatter. In the final moments, Hasdrubal, knowing the battle was lost, chose to meet death on his own terms. He charged headlong into the Roman ranks, sword flashing, determined to die in the heat of combat, and there, amid the clash of steel, he fell. The war elephants, initially a source of chaos for the Roman center, soon turned uncontrollable. Their rampage, unchecked, forced their own riders to cut them down, one by one, ending their threat and further demoralizing the Carthaginian forces. With their commander dead and their most fearsome beasts destroyed, the Carthaginian army collapsed, their resistance crumbling as the Roman victory became absolute. The battlefield was littered with the bodies of 10,000 Carthaginian warriors, their lives spent in a futile struggle. In contrast, Rome mourned the loss of only 2,000, a sobering reminder of the price of victory. Nero didn't linger to bask in his triumph. Instead, he immediately ordered his men on another grueling forced march south, determined to reunite with his forces shadowing Hannibal. In just 6 days, Nero rejoined the soldiers he had left to guard against Hannibal, the speed of his march a testament to his relentless determination and his military discipline. The news of Nero's victory reached Rome, sparking wild celebrations in the streets. This was the first significant triumph the Republic had achieved over the Carthaginians on Italian soil, a victory that breathed new life into Roman morale. According to legend, Hannibal learned of his brother's defeat in a gruesome fashion. A Roman rider approached his camp and hurled a heavy sack into his lines, the grim contents hidden from view. When the sack was brought before Hannibal and opened, it revealed his brother's severed head, a macabre message from Rome delivering not just the news of defeat, but the crushing weight of personal loss. However Hannibal learned of Hasdrubal's fate, the result was the same. He withdrew south to Bruttium, retreating to the safety of the port where Carthaginian ships brought him the meager supplies they could still manage to send. For 11 long years, Hannibal had terrorized Italy, outmaneuvering and destroying every Roman force that dared challenge him, his dominance undisputed. Yet the relentless years of warfare had drained him, and the lack of reliable local recruits left Hannibal in dire need of reinforcements if he had hoped to take Rome and force the Republic to its knees. With Hasdrubal's crushing defeat at the Metaurus River, any hope of fresh Carthaginian reinforcements was obliterated, ending Hannibal's dream of capturing Rome. Hannibal stayed in Italy for 6 more years, but with each passing day, his once great army withered, unable to execute the bold strategies that had once made them invincible. For years, the Romans had heeded the counsel of Quintus Fabius Maximus, whose strategy of attrition, called Fabian warfare, slowly wore down Hannibal, bleeding his army dry through a war of patience. But the victory at Metaurus ignited Roman morale, allowing the Republic to rally fresh recruits and fortify its legions. The Italian towns and tribes, whom Hannibal had tirelessly courted to abandon Rome, now stood resolute, their loyalty unshaken by Carthaginian persuasion. Had Hasdrubal succeeded in joining his brother, the combined Carthaginian force might well have stormed the walls of Rome itself, rewriting the destiny of the Mediterranean world. In his bid to support Hannibal, Hasdrubal left Spain vulnerable, and Rome's masterful general Scipio took full advantage, crushing every Carthaginian general who dared to oppose him. In 206 BC, at the Battle of Ilipa, Scipio led 48,000 Romans to a stunning victory, annihilating a 70,000-strong Carthaginian force and securing Roman dominance over all of Spain. With that decisive battle, Carthage was expelled from Iberia, where it had reigned for generations, and Rome took control of the region, an empire that would endure for another 600 years. It would take the arrival of the Visigoths in the 5th century AD before Rome would finally relinquish its iron hold on Spain. Under Roman rule, Spain flourished, its productivity and wealth soaring beyond anything achieved under Carthaginian rule. Roman administrative practices became so ingrained that they would shape Spanish governance long after the fall of the empire. With Spain firmly in its grasp, Rome tapped into the same manpower that Carthage had relied on for centuries to fill its mercenary armies. The Carthaginians, who rarely fought for themselves, now found their war machine starved of men, its power fading. In 207 BC, with the destruction of Hasdrubal's army and the conquest of Spain, Rome took a decisive step toward becoming an unstoppable imperial force, poised to reshape the known world.